everything, right? And we'll start with PepsiCo. So they own a company called Yum, and Yum Brands owns KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, which is absurd, right? Like this is not true free market competition. It's just that we're just like given the illusion of it when they're all cycling their profits up to the exact same company, 60% of wealth. So clearly wealth consolidation has occurred at the top rather than it being more of a straight line as perhaps true free economics would permit. In my opinion, the best solution is welfare. Wealth inequality is an issue because it's a good sign of a revolution taking place, actually. If you look before the French Revolution, there was massive wealth inequality there because the government would just take everything from the bottom classes. People competing, and we still want prices to remain low. We just want to increase consumer spending power, which is better done with welfare, in my opinion. Yeah, so in my opinion, this view is wrong because actually wealth redistribution is part of the free market. It's an important and integral part that every free market needs in order to function properly. Hey, this is Charles Pelham. If you like this content, please subscribe, check out my Twitch, check out my Instagram, and join my Discord below. Thank you for watching. Today we're discussing free market capitalism and the need for welfare. Okay, so basically what has happened is that the free market has started to degrade, and one of the ways we can fix this is by utilizing welfare. So I really want to get into that. So first we need to figure out what is the government's role in regards to the economy and everything like that. So I believe that the government has basically three responsibilities. They're supposed to represent the will of the people, protect private property rights, and correct market failures. So I generally believe that people are trying to maximize their human experience and meet any requirements they need in order to live a fulfilling life. So I also value individualism, and one of my big topics right here is liberalism. So I put some people on the screen. John Locke is this guy right here. My face is probably covering him, but he's the creator of liberalism. I put other people who had thoughts about what human nature is and what the government ought to be. I don't really like any of these guys except for the Unabomber, maybe. JK, just a joke. Just a joke. Okay, perfect competition. For the vast majority of history, nearly all markets have functioned in perfect competition. So what is perfect competition? It's a market structure where there are thousands of people competing and they all sell the exact same good. So think about like a farmer, for example. He makes wheat, and there's like 10,000 other farmers also making wheat, and they compete with each other. And the graph for this is a little bit weird. So because there's so many people competing, the demand for it caps out at a certain point. So it becomes a straight line instead of downward sloping like a traditional market. Okay, so but perfect competition is how markets have functioned for all of history, basically. So for example, there were farmers, they would sell bread. Like the amount of variety in the goods that you could buy throughout history was very limited, for example. And that's why you see things like maybe gold being expensive back in the olden times, right? Gold is like kind of something that when you make stuff out of it, it's more unique and specialized and things like that. But perfect competition prevents people from capturing too much wealth. So previously, goods and services produced required very little capital to start producing. Nowadays, however, the requirements to start production are far greater than they ever have been. This has led to almost all companies operating in oligopolistic or monopolistic forms. So because as time progresses, costs increase because of innovations and new technologies coming about that producers need to buy in order to compete effectively, that has all led to oligopolies and monopolies being the main form of what we think about in an economy. So we'll talk about monopolization and oligopolization. So the higher cost of entry in any market prevents perfect competition from coming about. Now, this leads to higher profits for those at the top, and it also leads to less competition within the market in general. So, for example, under perfect competition, you have competition in the market, right? There's a ton of people producing. But you also have a ton of employers as well, and that's a big thing I want you to take away from, that there are a ton of employers that need people to work for them in order to compete effectively, basically, which leads to wage competition, which allows wages to increase or at least remain stagnant. But nowadays, because monopolies and oligopolies have taken over, as industrialization has happened. It requires more capital to start those, so it's harder for people to enter those markets, right? It's not just enough to be a farmer anymore. If you want to be a farmer now, you need like gigantic tractors, you need massive plots of land, you need all these things in order to be an effective farmer. But you don't have those if you didn't need those a long time ago, but now you need those in order to be effective, right? So industrialization has kind of led to monopolies and oligopolies taking over because the cost of entering any market is greater than it normally would be. So over history, we see like more iconic brands form, for example, right? In order to make clothes nowadays, if you want to be competitive, you need massive machinery. It's not enough as just to like sew it, because the guy who has the massive machinery can do it far more efficiently than you can. So we also have brands like Nike, Adidas, and those types of companies that have brand loyalty associated with them, which leads to higher cost for basically the same quality. It's just like designer brands. And perhaps the more important part of this is that parent companies have also become the new norm as well. So in the next slide, I'll show you a graph of like company ownership and why you're not actually buying anything like freely, like people are making the choices for you. But so for example, Taco Bell and KFC aren't actually competing with each other. They're not competing as food companies. Instead, they just cycle their profits up to their parent company, and I'll show you that on this next slide. So if you look here, this is like a graph of who owns everything, right? And we'll start with PepsiCo. So they own a company called Yum, and Yum Brands owns KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, which is absurd, right? Like this is not true free market competition. It's just that we're just like given the illusion of it when they're all cycling their profits up to the exact same company. And this, if we see here, there's about like 10 major companies that actually own everything. And what this leads to is it leads to wage stagnation. And that's because these are the people who are employing everybody. Okay, so one of the big concepts in economics is called monopsony. That's a concept where it's like there's one employer in an area and they control the entire employment market, so they get to set wages and all that stuff. Okay? But here we have a major problem. When we want more competition to be about, because it leads to wages increasing, because there's you have to compete for labor, right? You like, if this firm is willing to pay me more to work for them, I'm going to go work for them. But when there's less competition in the free market, it leads to less employers for basic skilled labor. So that's why wages have remained stagnant, but productivity has increased drastically. That's like the big cause of that, is because there's not enough competition in the market. That's like the main takeaway I want you to take away from watching this video. So back to what I was saying, the deeper implication. There aren't enough firms competing for labor. If the majority of products Americans purchase are owned by 10 companies, that effectively means there are very few employers for labor. This allows corporations to have greater control over the free market wage rather than consumer supply and employer demand dictating it. In my opinion, people, especially non-educated workers, are being paid below the free market wage for their labor. In short, products are too expensive and employees are not being paid a true free market wage. What is he yapping about? I'm yapping about inequality, okay? Okay, so wealth inequality and the nature of modern competition. This competition has led to immense wealth inequality, right? So on the next slide, I'll show you something called the Lorenz curve to properly display America's wealth inequality. However, I want you to know that this is all to be expected. The cost of entry in any market increased. So, for example, same example I brought up earlier, if you want to be a farmer, you need $100,000 tractors and massive plots of land. If you want to make shirts, you need a Chinese sweatshop and state-sponsored slaves. These are the reasons why there are so few producers. The cost of entry of properly competing has increased, leading to very few producers actually competing. And what this also leads to is people increasing profits as well. And that's another key takeaway I want you to take away. If there's fewer producers and they have a greater control over the free market wage and supply and demand, it means that the people at the top tend to make more money. So this leads to our wealth inequality graph. So for example, so the left side is percentages of wealth and the bottom is percentage of households. So the straight line is the line of perfect equality, or I think it's equality, yeah, line of perfect equality. So, for example, 20% of households own 20% of labor, 40% own 40%, 60% own 60%, 80% own 80%, so on, right? Then that makes a lot of sense, right? If we lived under true free market competition, our wealth would look something similar to that, because there's so many employers, so many people competing, that there isn't enough of an opportunity for people to make immense amounts of profit, which leads to wages remaining kind of the same for everybody. But nowadays we see a drastic wealth shift towards the top, right? So instead of the bottom 60% actually owns about 40% of wealth, which, like, what? That makes no sense. The bottom 80% owns about 60% of wealth. So clearly wealth consolidation has occurred at the top, rather than it being more of a straight line, as perhaps true free economics would permit. Yeah, let's keep going. So here's a conclusion. The free market has been mismanaged by the government. They have continued to let corporations buy each other out, and they have improperly regulated markets. I don't believe the corporations are evil for making crazy profits. That's the nature of competition. That should be their goal. They should want to make as much money as possible, because it leads to more innovation taking place. It leads to better lives for everybody, in my opinion. And I also hold the government at fault for this entire issue, because they're not promoting competition, which should be their entire goal. Their goal is to correct negative externalities within the market. But if they aren't doing that, they're not doing their job. That's so stupid to me. But because of the increased cost of entering and operating in any market, we need to look at alternative solutions instead of splitting up corporations. In my opinion, the best solution is welfare. So what I just said before, it's understandable why the government hasn't perhaps regulated the markets and broken up big corporations into smaller corporations, because the cost of doing business now is so greater that if you were to split these big corporations up into tiny corporations, you wouldn't be making it's not as efficient for the market, right? The cost of these new firms entering would be absurd. But we can fix the problems by just giving people money. And let's explore that solution. So wealth redistribution is the best way to fix a free market. We already have welfare in America in the form of EBT and Medicare and Medicaid. However, I think that our Social Security net should be heavily expanded. We should increase our progressive tax system at the state and federal level and take that extra money to fund welfare programs. By increasing progressive taxes, we should ideally cut taxes for the working and middle class, and then increase taxes massively for the upper class. This is what Kamala kind of hints at with her wealth tax, or unrealized gains tax, where you tax just people holding shares of companies. Now, 25% is probably a crazy amount and probably lead to a complete destabilization of the free market. But maybe a 10% unrealized gains tax might not even be a bad idea at all, because it's basically advocating for what I'm kind of putting down here, where we need to redistribute money from the top to the bottom in the form of welfare and grants and things like that, in order to achieve that line of equality that a traditional free market would permit, but that doesn't exist nowadays. So welfare programs. So income taxes should be spent on EBT, UBI, post-secondary education, child tax credits, and single-payer healthcare. This fixes the wealth inequality that is currently present by taking money from the top and giving it to the bottom. This also increases consumers' purchasing power, which corrects the issue of increased cost. And I want to explain why wealth inequality is kind of an issue to begin with. Wealth inequality is an issue because it's a good sign of a revolution taking place, actually. If you look before the French Revolution, there was massive wealth inequality there, because the government would just take everything from the bottom classes. So and also it can lead to a destabilization of markets, right? If wealth inequality is super drastic, where the bottom percentages of people can't afford goods or necessities, that's going to lead to nobody buying them, basically. And that leads to the free market not working as intended. And that only comes about when you have monopolies and oligopolies. When there's monopolies, they can't actually tell what the free market wants very well. Or at least they don't produce what the free market wants without governmental regulation. So either the government needs to regulate, or we need to give people money in order for them to be able to afford those goods. So also, something to add, the UBI should not be equal to the amount someone would make to need to live, because that would create an entire negative externality in and of itself. because then people wouldn't work, right? We don't want that. We want people to work, and also want them to get governmental bonuses in order to more effectively make a free market. Yes, I did make this slideshow. I did a little bit ago. So I want to talk about why minimum wage should probably remain low, actually. This is kind of a more controversial take, although minimum wage is a good way of correcting the problem, right? Because it leads to the employers, who tend to have more money, paying their employees more, leading to the employees having greater spending power. But the problem with this, in order for the employers to be willing to take that risk and that cost, they're going to just increase the price of their goods, which basically just creates inflation. Like, we're just going to create inflation because the prices of goods will increase, even though the price of people's spending power will increase. So it's not really an effective solution. And also, only about 1.3% of Americans make federal minimum wage. And if we have a prosperous welfare system, that would be enough for them to live off of. So the issues with the minimum wage come from the fact that it actually, if we increase the minimum wage, it'll increase price of goods, which we don't really want, because we still want there to be a ton of people competing, and we still want prices to remain low. We just want to increase consumer spending power, which is better done with welfare, in my opinion. Also, it also leads to small businesses being unable to afford labor, because small businesses have less money to spend on that type of stuff, but big businesses have a lot more money to spend on that type of stuff. So just like something to keep in mind. And I also want to talk about the moral case for welfare. So we care a lot about individualism in America. Individualism is probably our bedrock. That's the foundation of liberalism, Western liberal countries, which is what America is. People ought to be judged as individuals and not as people of different groups, in my opinion. To me, it seems very unfair that some people are given a life of wealth and others are poor, right? So, for example, if you're born into poverty, it's not really your fault, like, at all. Like, you didn't choose that for your life whatsoever. Now, of course, you can choose to become somebody afterwards, right? I'm not saying that poor people can't become rich, or at least middle class. What I am saying is that the tools at your disposal when you're poor are less than that of when you're rich. So it's harder for you to go get into college education. It's harder for you to do all those things that we traditionally need in order to correct some externalities in the market. So if we are all equal, we should be judged on our merits alone. Individuals' futures and lives should be determined by the life or class they were born into. So if you're born into an impoverished class, that really shouldn't determine your future, in my opinion. This is why we need to make some sort of equal playing field for the poor and the rich. The best way of doing this is wealth redistribution, for all the programs that I listed before, where you take money from the rich and you give it to the poor in order to correct all these problems so that people can actually be properly judged by their merits alone and not by the class that they were born into. So let's talk about some different views on this. So conservatives tend to be against welfare, or they do not want to see it expanded. They typically view programs such as Obamacare as bad. They think that welfare is bad because they believe it is an improper intervention into the free market. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Very common phrase. They firmly believe in individualism, which is their reason for not supporting welfare. So, so in my opinion, this view is wrong, because actually wealth redistribution is part of the free market. It's an important and integral part that every free market needs in order to function properly, in order to correct issues of wealth inequality and things like that. And if the free market doesn't have that, if the free market doesn't have that, they better have perfect competition. If they don't have perfect competition, they're going to have a massive problem on their hands. So here are some specific views. Ben Shapiro said that he thinks Social Security is a Ponzi scheme that will bankrupt the United States. It is. He's against Social Security specifically, which is where you pay into it for your entire life and then you give it to, when you're an elderly person, you take money out for that. He believes because Americans aren't having enough kids, it will be unable to sustain itself, basically. Donald Trump, from what I can see, he doesn't seem to be against welfare. He mainly talks about why immigrants shouldn't be welfare queens, shouldn't be let into America, just become welfare queens. He also was the initial president under the welfare check provided under COVID-19, which is something to keep in mind. And So right-wing arguments tend to focus on people being self-reliant from the state. They don't want people to be dependent on the state for their livelihood, which makes very sense, right? If it's about individualism, that's kind of what you care about. Let's get to some left-wing propaganda, though. So liberals tend to support welfare programs. And funnily enough, this is also out of their love for individualism. They like programs such as EBT, Obamacare, and etc. Some people, such as Andrew Yang, who ran for office a little bit ago, believe in universal basic income, and others also support single-payer healthcare. So let's talk about Joe Biden. He continued Trump's welfare programs during COVID, raised a child tax credit, and also has attempted to increase EBT benefits. It is not shocking to say that Joe Biden supports welfare. I think it is important to note that some left-wing people support welfare out of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Some liberals want equity for people, and they do not value individualism. This tends to be a talking point for actually anti-liberals who are socialists and communists, in my opinion. You know, a socialist advocates for the means of production to be seized by the government, and then everybody owns everything, basically, which is improper way because the government can't command economies fail because they don't actually know what people want. But redistribution is actually a good idea from those types of markets because it corrects all the problems that I've highlighted in the slideshow. And that's a main takeaway that needs to be taken away, is that the problems that we deal with nowadays are kind of artificial in nature just because of industrialization. Industrialization has led to a massive increase in the cost of entering any market, leading to prices remaining stagnant, leading to prices increasing and wages remaining stagnant because there is not enough competition within our market. So, for example, there's a guy named Destiny. He holds a view very similar to mine. He supports state paid for college education, supports an expansive welfare state. He has sometimes described himself as a social democrat. I wouldn't go as far to say that I'm a social democrat. I'd probably say I'm still a liberal. I believe in liberalism, except I take a left-wing slant to it. So I would make arguments based on, okay, it seems pretty, if we're all equal, it seems pretty unfair that people are born into different classes. We at least need to make a basic playing field where everybody can compete equally, right? If you're going to school and you're fucking hungry, like that's like completely BS. Like, we should probably get you food in order so you can succeed. This was for school. I did this slideshow a long time ago, like a few months ago for my current events class, but now I'm just kind of, let's take stuff that I've already worked on and make a video out of it. Why not? Because I didn't prepare anything today. And my last quote, my conclusion, is from a saint named Saint Basil. The bread which you hold back belongs to the hungry. The coat which you guard in your locked storage chest belongs to the naked. The footwear moldering in your closet belongs to those without shoes. The silver that you keep hidden in a safe place belongs to the one in need. What the fuck? This gets at the idea that, we need to give back to others. We are all part of society. That's why we pay taxes. That's why we pay taxes into society. If we want to function in society, we have debts to pay. And arguably the rich have an even greater debt to pay, in my opinion, because they have utilized the systems far more effectively than others do. So, for example, in order to ship their goods, they use public roads, right? If they use public roads, that's taxpayer money. So they arguably use stuff like that more effectively than the traditional people do. So I think that's my conclusion. I want you to take away the fact that the free market has been improperly regulated and the government needs to step in and fix the problems. They need to do this with welfare or through busting up monopolies and oligopolies, in my opinion. This has been Charles Pellin. Thank you for watching.